The Silver Crest Grand Hotel had spent $300,000 on its holiday transformation, and every cent showed. Pine garlands, thick as forearms, twisted up the columns. Crystal ornaments caught the light from a chandelier the size of a small car, throwing constellations across the vaulted ceiling. The Innovation Summit's annual Winter Gala was, by any measure, a flawless event, the kind Charlotte Whitmore had engineered down to the placement of every centerpiece rose. She stood near the bar in a midnight blue gown that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, holding a glass of Chateau Margaux she hadn't touched, and watched the room the way a chess player watches a board. Every conversation she'd already mentally mapped. Every handshake she'd already scheduled. At 34, Charlotte had learned that events like this one were not parties. They were negotiations with better lighting. She was, by every account that mattered in the business world, the most formidable executive in the Mountain Corridor. Whitmore Global had been her grandfather's company, then her father's, and for the past 6 years, hers. She had restructured 3 failing subsidiaries, opened 2 new international divisions, and never once, not once, been caught off guard. She hadn't anticipated the man in the thrift store suit. He stood near the service corridor entrance, clearly out of place among the Italian wool and pearl necklaces, yet entirely unbothered by the fact. His suit was dark charcoal. Well cut, but worn at the elbows, in a way that suggested regular use rather than vanity. His tie was burgundy and slightly loose. He had the kind of face that had been handsome before life got into it. Jaw a little harder now, eyes a little more careful. A quiet line between his brows that hadn't been there, probably 5 years ago. Charlotte noticed him because he was the only person in the room not trying to be noticed. She heard him before she spoke to him. She had moved toward the coat check alcove to take a private call, and his voice carried around the column, low, warm, unmistakably fond. "Yeah, Bug. I know, it's late. I know. Did you count the stars from the window like I showed you?" A pause. He laughed quietly, and the laugh was so different from every other sound in the room that Charlotte stopped walking. "I'd rather be home building a snowman with you than be at any party in the world." She stood very still for a moment. He ended the call and turned, and their eyes met. His were gray-green, the color of ice over deep water, and they registered her with a brief, uncalculating directness that she was not used to from men at these events. He nodded politely and reached for his coat. She said, without quite planning to, "You're leaving?" "I am." He pulled on the coat, also thrift store, also worn well. "My daughter's bedtime was 40 minutes ago." She glanced at the room. "The cocktail hour isn't over." "The cocktail hour," he said pleasantly, "will survive without me." He found his keys in his coat pocket. "Miss Whitmore, good gala." He left. She stood there holding her untouched wine, and something she could not name shifted in her chest like a stone turning over in a riverbed. Outside, through the tall windows, the snow had started. She found him again by accident. 40 minutes after he'd gone, Charlotte had slipped out to the balcony that overlooked the hotel's back garden, wanting 2 minutes of silence before the keynote remarks. The cold hit her immediately, sharp, clean. The particular bite of mountain winter that she'd grown up with and never entirely stopped finding clarifying. Snow was falling in slow, fat flakes, settling on the wrought iron railing, on the dormant hedges, on the empty fountain below. He was standing at the far end of the balcony. He had not, apparently, left. He was leaning on the railing, coat open despite the cold, looking at the snow with the focused attention of someone doing something deliberate. His breath made small clouds. "I thought you left," Charlotte said. He didn't startle. "I did. Drove around the block and came back. Couldn't make myself take the highway yet." He glanced over. There's something about the first real snow of the year. Seemed wrong to miss it from inside a parking garage. She moved to stand a few feet away, her wine glass still in her hand. The cold was already finding the bare skin at her collarbone. She didn't go back inside. "Daniel Hayes," he said. "I serviced your building's heating system last October, the old Lennox units in the East Wing." "I remember the invoice," she said. "Charlotte Whitmore. I know who you are." She waited for the familiar next, beat the pitch, the ask, the business card appearing from a pocket. It didn't come. He just turned back to the snow. "How old is your daughter?" she asked. 8. Something in his face went soft and certain simultaneously, the way faces do when people talk about things they love without reservation. "Her name is Lily. She has my mother's stubbornness and her own particular theory about why the moon follows cars on highways." "What's the theory?" "That the moon is lonely and follows things that are moving because it can't move itself." He paused. She's not wrong. Emotionally, Charlotte looked at the snow. A long quiet settled between them, but it was not uncomfortable in the way most silences at these events were. It had weight without pressure. "You said you chose your daughter," she said finally. "Earlier, on the phone." "I did. Do you regret it?" Nights like this, being somewhere that isn't, she stopped. She wasn't sure why she was asking. "No." He said it immediately, simply, without performance. Her mother died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to end. He said it the way people say things they have learned to say aloud without shattering, which requires a great deal of practice. After that, I made a decision about what mattered, and I haven't second-guessed it. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry. Thank you." The snow fell between them. Somewhere inside, a string quartet had started playing something she recognized distantly as Debussy. "No one," she said, very quietly, "has ever chosen me first." She hadn't meant to say it. It came out of her the way things come out in cold air and snow and darkness without the usual editorial layer. She felt her face do something it rarely did in professional settings, which was become uncertain. He turned and looked at her. Not the polite, cataloging look he'd given her inside, but a slower, more considered one. Like he was adjusting something. "That's a significant thing to say to someone you met 40 minutes ago," he said. But his voice was not unkind. "I know." She straightened and looked back at the garden. "Forget I said it." "I won't," he said. "But I'll let you pretend I did." She almost smiled. It was the closest she'd come to one all evening. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on Larkspur Street that had been built in the 70s and renovated in small, optimistic stages ever since. The kitchen was narrow and bright, with one window that looked out over the street and another, smaller one above the sink that caught the morning light precisely. Daniel had figured out the light thing after the first winter here. He'd moved the small table 6 inches to the left to catch it. Lily was standing on her step stool, which was shaped like a frog because she had selected it at a garage sale 3 years ago, and it remained, in her assessment, the best step stool available. She was wearing pajamas with printed rabbits on them, and her hair was the specific chaos of a child who slept hard and without apology. They were making pancakes. This was Sunday. Sunday was pancakes. It had been Sunday pancakes since the first winter after Rebecca died, when Daniel had understood that what Lily needed, what he needed, was something predictable and warm and theirs. So, Sunday, pancakes, the kitchen radio on low, nobody needing to be anywhere for at least 2 hours. Lily was measuring flour with the intensity she brought to all tasks she considered serious. "Dad. You came home from the party with a different face." He looked up from the eggs he was cracking. "What does that mean?" she considered. She had her mother's method of considering things, which involved a slight sideways tilt of the head, as if listening for something. "It means your face was like this." She made a closed-off, careful expression. "And then you came back, and it was like this." She relaxed her face into something softer and slightly uncertain. "That's very specific. Mrs. Aldridge says I'm observant." "Mrs. Aldridge is correct." He poured batter into the pan. "I met someone at the party." Lily went very still in the way children go still when they sense an important conversation. "A friend? I don't know yet." He watched the batter bubble at the edges. "Maybe." A pause. The radio played something gentle. Outside the window, snow was still falling, slower now, like it had remembered it didn't need to hurry. "Does she make your voice soft?" Lily asked. He looked at his daughter. 8 years old, rabbit pajamas, flower on her elbow, and asking the exact right question. "Yeah," he said, after a moment. "I think she does." Lily returned to her measuring with the gravity of someone who has received important information and is processing it responsibly. "Good," she said finally. "Your voice is better when it's soft." He flipped the pancake. The snow outside had softened the street sounds to almost nothing. He thought about a balcony and a woman in a blue dress and the particular loneliness of someone who has learned to be extraordinary at everything except being known. He thought about the rules he had built, carefully, over 4 years. No risking the equilibrium they had built from grief and routine and Sunday pancakes. The rules had served him well. He stood in his kitchen in the morning light and felt, for the first time in a long time, the specific discomfort of a rule beginning to strain. The Lake Bend Coffee House was the kind of establishment that had survived because it refused to become anything other than what it was. 7 tables, 4 booths, 1 glass case of baked goods, and a hand-lettered chalkboard menu that had been updated and erased so many times, the board itself had a faint ghost of every previous item, like a palimpsest. It sat at the edge of Morrow Lake, which was frozen solid now, white and silent behind the fogged-up windows. Charlotte arrived first. This was unusual. She was, professionally, never the one who waited. She sat in the corner booth, which was warm from the adjacent wall vent, and looked at the menu with genuine uncertainty. She ate breakfast when she ate it at her desk, something assembled by her assistant from the building's cafe. She was not in the habit of choosing. Daniel came in, shaking snow off his jacket, said something to the woman behind the counter that made her laugh, and slid into the opposite side of the booth. "The cinnamon rolls," he said, before she could speak. "What?" "That's what you're trying to decide. Whether to get the cinnamon roll or be sensible." She looked at him. "You don't know what I was thinking. I know you've been holding the menu with both hands and haven't looked at the coffee section once." He hung his coat on the booth hook. "You were always going to the pastry section." She set the menu down. "Fine." The rolls arrived warm, the icing slightly crystallized at the edges, the center soft. Charlotte ate hers with the focused attention she gave to things she was experiencing rather than consuming. It had been, she realized, quite a long time since she had eaten something just because it was good. "Tell me about your father," Daniel said. She looked up. "Why?" "Because you went somewhere far away for a minute just then, and it didn't look like work." She set down her fork. Outside, the blizzard had thickened. The lake had disappeared completely into white. "My father," she said slowly, "was the kind of man who loved me in the way that people love things they intend to use." She said it without particular bitterness, just with the precision of someone who has had a long time to find the right words. "He handed me the company because I was the best candidate and his only child, in that order. The love was real. The choosing of me was conditional on the performance." She picked up her coffee cup. "I graduated summa from Wharton, and he took me to dinner. I restructured Whitmore's European division at 28, and he called me from a board meeting. I don't remember a single conversation with him where he asked me about something that wasn't the company." Daniel was quiet, listening in the particular way of someone who is not organizing his response while she speaks. "What about you?" she said. "The last 4 years. You said you haven't dated." "No." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I had a good marriage. Rebecca she was very funny, impatient with pretense, very loyal. She made friends for life every time she made a friend." He paused. "After she died, I thought about dating in the abstract, the way you think about a foreign country you might visit someday. And then the abstract stayed abstract, and 4 years happened. Do you miss it?" "The being with someone." He looked out at the blizzard. "I miss being known," he said. "That's different from missing company." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "It is. I don't resent my sacrifice," he added. "I chose it. That matters." "I know," she said. And she did, precisely. because choosing things was something she understood, and not choosing was something she had spent 34 years avoiding. They ordered more coffee. The blizzard rearranged itself outside. They stayed longer than either of them had planned. 3 days later, they walked along the path that circled the frozen lake, which was a thing Charlotte had not done in winter since she was 12 years old. She had good boots. She'd had to borrow a pair of Whitmore Global's event merchandise hiking boots from a storage closet, and the path was packed enough to be navigable. But barely. The snow had been falling intermittently for 2 days, and the trees along the shore held it in heavy white arrangements on their branches. They walked at the pace of people who are not going anywhere in particular. She had been trying to say something for the last 10 minutes and had not managed it. Daniel, to his credit, had not asked. He walked with his hands in his coat pockets and watched the lake and waited with the patience of someone who had learned, probably through parenting, that some things couldn't be hurried. "I've never been kissed without it meaning something strategic," she said. She felt him slow. "What I mean is she stopped walking too, facing the lake." The ice was a matte white in the overcast light. "Every relationship I've had, every man. There was always a calculus, whether I knew it consciously or not. He was useful to the company, or useful to my image, or useful to my loneliness, in a way that was contained and manageable. I don't know what it feels like to let something be uncontrolled." She turned to look at him. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said, carefully. "I know you have rules. I know there's Lily. I'm telling you this because I haven't told anyone, and it seems like the kind of thing I should practice saying out loud." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. The snow made small sounds in the branches above them. He said, "Then I won't kiss you until it means something safe." She blinked. That's an odd thing to say." "It's what's true." He started walking again. "You've been managing everything your whole life. That's not romance. That's administration." He said it without cruelty, which was what made it land. "When it happens, if it happens, I want you to know exactly what it is and not have to calculate it." She walked beside him. "That's a very high bar," she said. "You're a person who clears high bars." He glanced at her sideways. "I've read the business section." She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and it went up into the cold air and the snow and the bare branches, and hung there for a moment like something made visible. They walked the rest of the way around the lake. Her assistant called on a Wednesday afternoon to tell her. Her father had been moved to palliative care 2 weeks earlier. The progression had been faster than projected. Charlotte received the call in her office on the 14th floor, where the windows faced north, and on clear days you could see the ridgeline of the Beckman Range. It was not a clear day. She spent 3 hours finishing the briefing documents for the Thursday board meeting. Then she drove, without consciously deciding where, to a diner called Frosted on Route 9 that she had noticed from the road a dozen times and never entered. She texted Daniel, "I don't know why I'm telling you this, but my father died this afternoon." He texted back within 4 minutes. "Where are you?" She sent the address. He was there in 20 minutes, still in his work clothes, canvas jacket, work boots, a smear of something mechanical on his left forearm he hadn't noticed. He slid into the booth across from her and looked at her face and said nothing. He picked up the menu and read it with genuine attention and said, "The burgers are good here. Have you eaten?" "No." "Okay." They ordered burgers and coffee, and Daniel talked, gently and without agenda, about the drive over, about Lily's current project at school, a diorama of the solar system in a shoebox about the small catastrophe of the heating unit on the Millbrook building, and the pipe that had frozen at entirely the wrong moment. He talked about ordinary things with the deliberateness of a man who understands that sometimes what grief needs is not a mirror, but a window. The food came. Charlotte ate half her burger. This was more than she'd eaten at a meal in 2 days. He hadn't asked her how she was doing. She noticed this. She'd had 40 calls that afternoon, board members, cousins, the family attorney, the PR firm, and every single one had opened with, "How are you doing, Charlotte?" And she had answered with, "Fine. Thank you." Managing well 40 times, and each time it had been true in one sense and entirely empty in another. Daniel hadn't asked. She started crying in the parking lot. It came without announcement, which was the only way it was going to come, because Charlotte Whitmore did not permit tears in meetings or offices or hotel lobbies. But the parking lot of Frosted Diner on Route 9, under the pink neon sign, in the snow, apparently her grief had decided this was sufficient. Daniel put his arms around her. Not dramatically, not with commentary. He just held her in the parking lot in the cold, and she pressed her face against his canvas jacket and cried for her father and for the company and for the dinner that had never happened and the conversation that would now never happen, the one where she asked him whether he'd been proud of her for reasons other than the quarterly reports. When she stopped, he didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "Let's get you back to your car." That was all. It was, she thought later, exactly right. She arrived on a Saturday afternoon with a small paper bag, which she held carefully, and stood at the door of the Larkspur Street apartment like someone who had prepared extensively for a thing and was now uncertain whether the preparation was sufficient. Lily opened the door. She was 8 years old and wearing a sweater with a fox on it, and regarding Charlotte with the frank, calibrating gaze of a child who has not yet learned that staring is rude, or who has learned it and decided it doesn't apply in circumstances of genuine curiosity. "You're the one who makes his voice soft," Lily said. Charlotte blinked. "I'm Charlotte. I know. He talks about you." Lily stepped back to let her in, with the manner of someone granting provisional access. "What's in the bag?" Charlotte reached in and produced a small, boxed telescope, the kind designed for children, sturdy and simple, with a paper star map folded inside. She had done actual research on this. She had called the astronomy department at Hargrove University and asked what an 8-year-old interested in the night sky would find useful and not condescending. Lily looked at it for a moment without touching it. "It's for looking at the winter constellations," Charlotte said. "Orion is very clear this time of year, and there's a moon chart in the box." Lily looked up at her. "Are you going to leave?" The question arrived without preamble. Charlotte felt it land. "I don't know," she said honestly, because she was not going to lie to this child. "I don't have a very good record with staying in one place." Lily considered this with the sideways head tilt. "Do you know how to braid hair?" The conversational shift was vertiginous. "I do, actually. Yes, my dad can only do one kind. It always falls out. I could show you a different way." Another long look. Lily took the telescope from her hands with the careful reverence of someone accepting something serious. "You can stay for pancakes," she said. "But we already had them today, so it'll have to be Saturday." "That works for me. Do you have a lot of Saturdays?" Charlotte felt something she could not immediately name-shift in her chest. She looked at this child standing in the narrow hallway of a third-floor apartment with a telescope she'd just been given by a stranger, asking in the most direct possible way whether she could be trusted. "I'm working on having more of them," Charlotte said. From the kitchen doorway, Daniel watched. The next Saturday, Lily dragged Charlotte outside to help build a snowman in the small yard behind the building, which was technically a shared space, but which the other tenants had ceded to Lily some time ago by virtue of her enthusiastic occupation of it. Daniel watched from the kitchen window. He had made this decision to stand at the window and not go down deliberately. He needed to see this without being part of it. He needed to see whether what he felt when he looked at Charlotte was something that existed only in the particular atmosphere of late nights and quiet conversations, or whether it survived the ordinary daylight of a Saturday. It survived. Charlotte was not a natural builder of snowmen. This was immediately apparent. She was precise and methodical in a way that didn't translate to snow, and Lily was apparently explaining to her at some length the specific structural principles she'd developed over years of practice. Charlotte was listening with the focused attention she gave to actual structural engineers in actual boardrooms, and at some point she laughed at something Lily said, and the laugh was the real one, the one Daniel had first heard on the lake walk, and he felt it from 3 floors up. He had been afraid of this for weeks now. He had thought the fear was about Lily, about what it would mean if Charlotte was a temporary thing, and Lily had gotten attached, and then she was gone. But standing at the kitchen window, watching his daughter direct this woman in the architecture of a snowman, Daniel understood that the fear was simpler and less noble than that. He was afraid of losing someone again. Not Lily, losing someone. Him. He had built a life that was proof against that specific loss. You couldn't lose what you didn't risk. He had been so careful, so methodical, so Sunday pancakes and no dating, and the carefulness had worked well, and he was, by any measure, a good father and a functioning person, and not particularly unhappy. But he was standing at a kitchen window watching someone he hadn't planned for, and she was laughing in his backyard, and the snowman was already leaning dangerously to the left. And he was not, he realized, afraid of the leaning. He went downstairs. Lily immediately enlisted him in the structural crisis of the snowman's left side. He worked on it for a few minutes, and then he looked up, and Charlotte was watching him with an expression he recognized because it was his own, the particular look of someone understanding something they weren't entirely prepared to understand. Lily had gone to get the scarf from inside. In the small yard behind the building on Larkspur Street, with the snowman listing gently behind them and the snow falling soft and steady, Charlotte said very quietly, "No one's ever stayed." He looked at her. He kissed her. It was not dramatic. It was the most unhurried thing he had done in 4 years, a hand at her jaw, a moment's stillness, the snow falling on both of them, the absolute absence of calculation on either side. It lasted exactly as long as it needed to last. When it ended, she looked at him with an expression he didn't have a name for. "You said you'd wait," she said, "until it meant something safe." "That's what this is," he said. Lily reappeared in the doorway with a striped scarf and an expression of total non-surprise. The merger came back to life on a Tuesday. The Harmon Voss acquisition had been dormant for 3 months while the regulatory review dragged. And then suddenly it wasn't dormant, and Charlotte had 48 hours to get to New York and sit across a conference table from 3 sets of attorneys and not blink. She went. This was what she did. The New York coverage found her in the lobby of the Harmon building on the first day. Someone had photographed her getting out of a car the previous evening, and a business correspondent had run a sidebar about the Whitmore Global CEO's rumored personal life, connecting her to a man described only as a local tradesperson. The piece was not malicious, but it was precise in its particular way, the way of things designed to make a person seem smaller than they are by framing them against an incongruity. Daniel saw it. He saw it at 7 in the morning, sitting in his truck outside a job site, and he read the 3 paragraphs twice and then sat for a while looking at the steering wheel. He knew what he was. He'd never had any illusions about what. He was a heating and cooling technician in a 12-year-old truck who lived in a 3rd-floor walk-up and made Sunday pancakes and went to bed at 10 and coached Lily's soccer team in the fall. He knew what Charlotte's world was. He'd seen the gala, the hotel, the board members who looked at him in the lobby like he was a service entrance. There was a version of this story that ended with him removing himself gracefully and protecting everyone from the trouble of the obvious conclusion. He had been thinking about that version on and off for a week. In the practical, unglamorous way he thought about structural problems in old buildings, identifying the load-bearing elements, planning the controlled descent. He called Charlotte. She answered in 2 rings, which told him something. "I saw it," he said. "It's nothing," she said. "Media noise." "It doesn't." "Charlotte." She stopped. "I need to ask you something. And I need you to answer it as if the answer is just between us and nobody else is watching." A pause. "Okay. Is this are we? Is this something that you want? Or something that happened to you?" The silence that followed was long enough that he started to understand it as an answer of one kind. Then she said, "I've been afraid to want things that weren't strategic. My whole life. I've been afraid because wanting something real means you can lose something real, and I am." Her voice was very controlled, which meant it was costing her something. "I am genuinely terrified, Daniel, and I want this. Both of those things are true at the same time." He exhaled. That evening, Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table when Daniel sat down across from her. She looked up. "You're doing the face again," she said. "The one from the party. The closed one." "I'm thinking." "About Charlotte?" He nodded. Lily put her pencil down with the gravity of a person who has something important to contribute. "Dad. Snow melts if you stay inside." He looked at his daughter. "If you stay inside," she said patiently, "you don't get to touch it." He sat with that for a moment. "When did you get this smart?" "I was always this smart," Lily said, and picked up her pencil. The storm that came the following Friday was the worst of the winter, not in the dangerous sense, but in the sense of abundance, of the sky deciding to be extravagant. 14 inches were forecast. By evening, the streets of Aspen Ridge had gone quiet in the way they only go quiet under real snow, when the world lowers its voice because something larger is happening. Charlotte drove back from the airport in a rental with her hazards on and her hands steady on the wheel. She had finished the merger. The papers were signed, the attorneys were satisfied, the board would be informed in the morning. She had done everything the company required. She had sat in 4 days of meetings and been exactly what Whitmore Global needed her to be. And somewhere in the middle of the 3rd day, she had understood, not dramatically, just quietly, the way you understand something when the noise is absent, that she had been many things for many people for a very long time. And she had never once, not once, sat in a room and simply been Charlotte. She didn't call ahead. She wasn't sure, even as she turned onto Larkspur Street, whether she was doing the right thing. She was sure that she was doing the true thing, which felt, for the first time in as long as she could remember, like enough. She rang the buzzer at 10:15. A pause. Then Daniel's voice through the intercom, careful and awake. "Charlotte? It's me." The door clicked. The apartment was warm and quiet in the way of a place where a child is already asleep. One lamp in the living room, the kitchen light on, a mug of something on the counter. Daniel was in jeans and a worn flannel shirt, his feet bare, his hair slightly unruly, and he looked so completely, uncomplicatedly himself that Charlotte stood in the doorway for a moment and felt the specific relief of something you have been bracing against suddenly being unnecessary. She came inside. He closed the door against the snow. "The merger closed," she said. "I know. I saw. I came back. I see that too." She set her bag down on the chair beside the door. The snow was still audible, or rather, the quality of silence that snow makes was audible, the muffled, particular hush. "I've never been kissed," she said, "because I never let anyone close enough." He didn't say anything. He watched her. "I calculated everything. Even the things I told myself were spontaneous." Even she stopped. She started again. "The night on the balcony. When I said no one had ever chosen me first, I meant it. I meant it. And then I went home and I thought about how that sounded and I spent 2 hours deciding whether it was tactically unwise to have said it." Her voice was even, but something in her eyes was not. "I'm tired of it, Daniel. I am so tired of auditing myself." He crossed the room. He put his hands on either side of her face, unhurried, deliberate, the way he did everything, and he looked at her for a long moment, and she felt, for the first time she could identify in her adult life, that she was being seen rather than assessed. "Then let me," he said. He kissed her. This one was different from the one in the snow-covered yard, which had been first, and therefore tentative, in the way that first things are. This one had the knowledge of 4 weeks behind it, 4 weeks of coffee and walks, and her father's death and parking lots, and Sunday pancake invitations, and a small girl asking whether she planned to stay. It had that weight, and it was not light, and it was not calculated, and it was exactly what she had told herself. For 34 years, was not available to people like her. She was still for a moment after it ended. Then she pressed her forehead against his, and she breathed. From the hallway, small, quiet, bare feet on the hardwood, Lily watched. She had gotten up, as she sometimes did, for a glass of water. She stood at the edge of the hallway with her glass in her hand and her rabbit pajamas and her mother's sideways tilt of the head. She watched her father hold someone in the kitchen while the snow fell outside the window. She watched the way he held her like it mattered, like he had decided it mattered, like the deciding had cost him something and he was keeping it anyway. Lily went back to bed. She fell asleep quickly, in the particular peace of a child who has witnessed something important and understood it to be good. In the kitchen, in the snow quiet of Larkspur Street, Charlotte Whitmore stood with her forehead against Daniel Hayes's shoulder and breathed, and did not count anything, and did not calculate, and did not audit, and was for this moment, and then for the moments that followed, and then for the long, ordinary, beautiful work of what comes after simply and completely herself. Sometimes love isn't fireworks. Sometimes it's a man choosing pancakes over power.